Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, welcome. This is Jenimbai talking to you as co-chair of the recently created City Network for Racial Justice, NRJ. This is today our first event in honor of this launch of this new initiative that was literally born over the summer. And I'm very excited to welcome a wonderful range of panelists for a conversation that promises to be in our records for a long time, I'm sure. So just a few words on the network. So the NRJ, the Network for Racial Justice, is a staff affinity group for people of color at City. And our network aims to bring together staff of color, both professional and academic, who feel passionate about racial justice and want to see a truly inclusive environment at City. So we speak up against discrimination, we challenge systematic racism, and we are committed to a vision of decolonizing City. As part of our duties, we support people of color, but staff members, and we enable people of color to feel that they are valued and have a critical role within the university. But we also provide a forum where staff can network and share opportunities and discuss. And as part of this space, safe space that we are creating today, we are launching the network via this event, a live to be recorded conversation entitled Black History Month Unfiltered. The objective of this conversation is really to really to explore a bit the genealogy of this celebration that exists across the Atlantic, and to interrogate its relevance in nowadays context. And to do so, we have invited a range of different perspectives, different generations of Black activists in their respective fields of action, from whether in academia or outside, to question the current meaning and value of this month-long celebration. So what do Black History Months mean in a persisting context of systematic racism and structural inequalities? To answer this question, we have Nathan Richards, who is a filmmaker, a journalist, and a digital historian. He's a Sussex Humanities Lab doctoral scholar at the University of Sussex, where he's researching a PhD project concerned with how digital tools, mediums, and research methods are informing African historiography, historical memories, and heritage practices. His 2014 film entitled Absent from the Academy, which explored the lack of senior Black academics in the UK, a harsh, persisting reality, I should add, is a key intervention in the current conversation about race in British academia. We have also Kelly Foster, who is a public historian working both online and on the road as a London Blue Badge guide. She's a chapter lead for Creative Commons UK and is involved in global initiatives to encourage more people of African heritage to contribute to Wikipedia and its sister projects. Kelly has worked with community and independent archives in London for over 15 years, and she's the founding member of Transmission. Go and check it out if you haven't done so yet, which is a collective of archivists and historians of African descent. We have also our very own Dean, Associate Dean for People and Culture, Dr. Jessica Jones-Nielsen, who is a counseling psychologist and who is, as I just mentioned, Associate Dean for the School of Arts and Social Science at City University of London. She's also an academic lead for the Race Equality and Athena Swan Charters Group, and provides academic leadership, direction, advice, and support to colleagues involved in the delivery of racial justice and gender equality initiatives. Jessica has a background in community-based participatory research and examines the intersections between determinants of health and illness, such as ethnicity, gender, and mental health. Through her research, Jessica is passionate about promoting engagement in positive health behaviors and resilience, with particular emphasis on the health and well-being of minority ethnic groups. And last but not least, as moderator, our ex-city colleague, but forever NRJ colleagues, Dr. Louisa Ochum Egbunike, who is an associate professor in African literature at Durham University, and who worked before, as I just mentioned, at City University of London and Manchester Metropolitan University. Louisa completed her PhD on the Igbo experience in the Igbo Nigerian novel at SASS, where she has also lectured in contemporary African literature. In 2016, Louisa was selected as one of the BBC and the Arts Humanities Research Council's New Generation Thinkers, which has seen her create and present content for BBC Radio 3, BBC Radio 4, BBC World Service, and BBC Arts Online. Louisa has published in a range of academic books and journals, she has written reviews for the Times and literary supplements that appeared on the Guardian newspaper podcast, and recently she featured in David Olusoga's BBC's 4 documentary on African literature, African Turns the Page. She's a curator of a touring art exhibition, Legacies of Biafra, and co-writer and producer of the documentary film In the Shadow of Biafra. Louisa is one of the founders and conveners of the annual International Igbo Conference. As you can tell, we are blessed. Before leaving the floor to Louisa, I want to give some thanks. I want to give some massive thanks to the Associate Dean for People and Culture for her support for this event, without whom this event wouldn't have been possible. I want to acknowledge the collaboration and give thanks to the Sociology Working Group on Racial Justice, which has helped tremendously in making this event happen. And last but not least, I want to thank our panelists for joining us, for sharing their insights, and our moderator, and for their time and energy. We are very grateful to have you. You will be able to ask questions in the Q&A, so feel free as the conversation goes to post your questions there. We will be answering them at the end of the conversation. It will be obviously part of the conversation. Energy staff members and students have been invited to ask questions, and these will be addressed as well. The event is recorded and will be posted on our webpage, on the City NRJ webpage. Welcome Thank you. Big up to you all. And Luisa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you for all your hard work in putting this event together. This is a really timely conversation that we're having.
Luisa,
Yeah.
I think we're hearing you less well than we were hearing you before.
No?
Good.
Yes? Okay, better. Okay, so this is a really timely conversation that we're having. We're rethinking or thinking about reflecting on Black History Month in Black History Month, but also in a moment when there is a lot of unrest in our world, lots of change is happening. And so in the spirit of thinking about the wider social concerns that we're grappling with, thinking about where Black history sits within that. And so I'm joined by three brilliant minds today to think through some of these subject areas. And this event is called Unfiltered, so hopefully everyone feels unfiltered. We're going to have, I hope, an enriching discussion where I imagine views might diverge. We might also try and push the boundaries a bit. Some thoughts won't be fully formed yet. We're thinking this through. And so we also welcome in the Q&A for comments, questions, engagement. And if you want to put your comment in the chat, or if your question in the chat as we talk through these various subjects, feel free to do so, and then we'll pick it up later on. So where should we start? So we're thinking about Black History Month, and we're thinking about sort of past, present, and future. So it makes sense also, as we're joined by two historians, to start in the past and think about the origins of Black History Month, how it came into being, when it came into being, and why it came into being. So I might ask Kelly to start us off and give us that kind of historical grounding for our conversation.
Right, so thanks, Louisa, and hello, everybody. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. So Louisa has set me up with the unenviable task of thinking to the origins of Black History Month in the UK. And even though it seems like it's been with us forever, Black History Month celebrated in the UK anyway, celebrated its 30th birthday in 2017. So the first Black History Month in the UK started in 1987, on the 1st of October 1987. And it was thanks to the efforts of one particular man and a number of others, but I'm going to try and call out as many names as I can during this process. I think it's important to acknowledge people. They're all still with us, by the way. You know, these aren't kind of long past characters from history who've long since died. They're all still with us. So Akiaba Adesibo was the originator and that first organizer of Black History Month in 1987. And it's important to think about Black History Month as part of a broader context that was going on in 1987. Akiaba Adesibo had worked in the special projects as a special projects officer under Ken Livingstone, when Ken Livingstone was leader of the Greater London Council, the GLC. Under Ken Livingstone's leadership, the Greater London Council, which was the democratically elected government of London until the Tory Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher decided to abolish the GLC in 1986. The GLC was an anti-racist, pro-feminist, pro-LGBT, pro-disability government. And however, it was abolished. The GLC was abolished by Margaret Thatcher. And Black History Month happened the year after the abolition of the GLC. The organisation that replaced the GLC was called the London Strategic Unit, and was made up of a number of ex-GLC members, unsurprisingly. And they wanted to create a legacy that would embed itself as a counter narrative to the Tory government of the day. And that was really their aim in doing that first Black History Month. The month of October was chosen for a particular reason, so it can be embedded in the school calendar. And so it fit within the broader rhythms of the a year in the UK around harvest festivals. It was part of a broader context of a years long worth of commemorations of events to provoke people to think about the histories of people of African descent, and that was called the African Jubilee Year. And that is because 1987 was the centenary of the birth of Marcus Garvey. So Black History Month, that first Black History Month happened in African Jubilee Year. So this is very much sitting within a context of a political context, very much sitting within a Pan-African context, and very much sitting within a broader context of Pan-African activism. For those of you that don't know, Marcus Garvey was a Jamaican-born activist, probably most associated with his organization, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, which was really at its peak in the 1920s. The first Black History Month event happened in a place of significance, and that is in City Hall in London. So if you know London fairly well, it's City Hall is now a hotel, and the London Aquarium on the south banks of the River Thames. And the guest speaker in that case was a man called Malana Karenga, who is the founder of Kwanzaa, the winter festival so celebrated in the African American culture, but actually also around the entire African diaspora. And they chose Karenga because of his founding of Kwanzaa, because they very much wanted to see Black History Month as one of these festivals that would have a continuation after that first event, and would become embedded into the rhythms of the year. I also want to recognise the efforts of people like Linda Bellos, who in 1987 was leader of Lambeth Council. Linda Bellos, whose birth name is Linda Adebowale, who is of Jewish and Nigerian ancestry and is a Brixton woman through and through. She was leader of Lambeth Council, as I said. She was also a huge champion of that first Black History Month, as was Ansel Wong. Ansel Wong is an educator from Trinidad. He's a carnivalist. He was active in the Black Liberation Front in the 70s and 80s. He was also one of the key champions and organizers of that first Black History Month as well. And I just want to close with the motto that was on the invitation for Karenga's address to the public, and it was a Sankofa symbol, the symbol of a bird from the Adinkra symbol, Adinkra system of symbols, and the words retrieving the past is no taboo. So even then, you know, they were very much centered around thinking about the symbols that are can be related to from the broader African diaspora. So yeah, I don't know if that gives you a useful foundation from which that we can start thinking about its relevance today.
Thank you, Kelly. That was, as always, amazing and very kind of comprehensive, giving us a lot to think about. I think one of the things that comes out of your summation of the origins of Black History Month in the UK is the kind of politically, sort of the politics of the time and the quite divisive politics of the Tory government in the 80s, and the idea of actually using Black History Month as a way of pushing back against the kinds of inequalities that you spoke through. And we're now rethinking or revisiting the conversation around Black History Month under another Tory government, and in a time of also kind of volatility and injustice. And I think we should sort of hold that in our minds as we move through this conversation. But I wanted to bring Nathan and Jessica into the discussion. And I mean, Jessica, you grew up in the US and now living in the UK, and so I've also sort of seen and engaged with Black History Month on both sides of the Atlantic. So I'd be interested to hear from you the kind of continuities and differences across how people engage with Black History Month. And Nathan, as another historian on the panel, I wondered if you wanted to add anything to the foundations that Kelly laid out for us, and maybe think through as well some of the ways in which Black History Month has been utilized, or what it means, you know, within the kind of communities or within institutions, how you've seen it evolve since its inception, and yeah, and kind of what function you think it plays in society.
Should I go or Jessica?
I'm happy to go, or you can go.
You go ahead, please.
Okay. Maybe I could just speak to what Kelly just shared with us, which was a great, I think, although I know probably really brief because there's so much more history than what you just explored with us today. So I definitely hats off to you for being able to summarize it in the way that you did, Kelly. So, growing up in Central Florida, and everyone probably knows Florida, especially if you're on Twitter, that Florida man, Black History Month always held a particular purpose in a life of someone like myself and other individuals who identified as Black or African American. One is because it's the first time in our existence or in growing up in an educational system that is predominantly white, you get to hear about people who look like you. You get to celebrate people who look like you, and you get to recognize and be proud of the fact that we were able to contribute to the advancement of the human race. But it was always the 1 month of the year, and it was always the shortest month of the year. So that's always been the historical kind of criticism about Black History Month in the US. But again, it was one to celebrate and to join in activities. I've always been very active in promoting, Black academics and Black artists in any institution I've ever been in. So I've always been part of those organizations and planning committees that would always bring, those particular highlights to predominantly white audiences. And so, again, I think just like here in the UK, it's always about naming the big names. It's always about the three kind of forefathers or foremothers who paved the way to our independence and our existence in the way that it is currently. But I think now, and maybe you were alluding to it, Louisa, there is a bit of ambivalence about that. For me, it's around, how far have we come? And for me, crossing over onto the other side, looking at Black History Month from the UK perspective, again, it's very much the same thing about celebrating, but also the political edge in which the Black History Month brings to us and our understanding and our contributions. But it's also about proving whether we're equal and whether we are equal in the eyes of society. And that's always the crux. So, I mean, Nathan, you might be better poised to kind of talk about sort of the origins of Black History Month in the US since you're a historian. But all I could tell you is that in 1915, that Dr. Carter G. Woodson, he's the one who founded the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. And he did it not so much because he wanted for everyone to recognize and celebrate the contributions of Black folks in America, but it's pretty much a political edge or political strategy in order to ensure that people recognize our contributions, particularly at the offset of World War I, when they were putting Black men in the front lines, and when they came back, they weren't celebrated, but taunted by nooses. So again, he thought about this quite carefully, and then it wasn't until perhaps maybe decades later that 1 week, which was called the Negro History Week, which was again celebrated in February 1926, turned into the month that we know it now. But however, I keep on questioning, are we still equal? Are we still recognized as the citizens? And for me, being able to do the work that I'm doing and, not leaving it just to 1 month, but leaving it for the entire year is always, it's never ending and it's always continuous, what we're trying to achieve. We talk about racial justice, but when is enough enough? It's really interesting to kind of also see that, there has been so much momentum recently. And as you were saying earlier, Louisa, that, we are finding ourselves in a particular time and space around sort of the events of Black Lives Matter, the movement that has become more global. But I've been talking about Black Lives Matter for years now, because police brutality has been an issue in the US for as long as I can remember. And I don't say it in the sense of media sensation, I say it in the sense that my brother has been a victim of police brutality. My friend has died and he was shot and he lost his life to police brutality. but I say it because this is a commitment to being able to advance our people, and also to have our advancements being recognized by the greater society, whether it's in the UK or the US. And that, you know, that work, that sort of constant grind of trying to make sure that people appreciate it and recognize it continues to persist. But I think the meaning and the need for it is now more significant than ever, and has a lot more meaning in the way in which we are talking about it quite directly, and how we are sort of questioning it in a very unfiltered way. So I do appreciate having the opportunity to speak to this. And I think I can pass it over to Nathan.
Thank you. You cut out a little bit, a bit there, so I may repeat some of the things that you may have said. I think it's my internet. So what does it mean? Louise asked me. This is, firstly, yes, I'm an historian, but I'm interested more, so not in particular periods in time, but kinds of institutions of memory, like the way we remember, what kind of triggers or kind of mnemonic devices exist within our kind of culture that help us kind of remember. And of course, Black History Month is a kind of device, right? It's a kind of institution that helps us. We kind of imbibe it with a certain kind of cultural context and kind of components, and then we draw on it every now and then, and it kind of evolves. And so I'm interested in it as a kind of practice. So Kelly would be the best person to ask about the very specific kind of development. But I was interested in what Kelly said about this idea of this kind of political origins, and I think that's really important to remember, that there was an activism behind this this construction of Black History Month. It wasn't just a celebration of kind of culture. There was imperatives, political imperatives behind it. So I think that's important to kind of come back to, and it's one of the issues I struggle with, because I'm not so much a fan of Black History Month for its place, and it's a term that Kelly hates. It's kind of ghettoizing of Black history. But I do have to kind of contend with the fact that there was a political activism behind it. Right? So there was an intention behind it. I feel like that's lost to some extent. So as a kind of caveat, but Black history was always present for me growing up. I'm born in 1982. In 1987, as Kelly says, as this movement emerges. By the time I got to around about 15, 16, and I would start attending events by myself, and I traveled. Sorry, I'm a bit muffled apparently. Can you hear me now? Is that better or worse? Is that okay? Yeah. And I would start to attend kind of events by myself, and I remember going to, I think it was Edgware, to see a film by Don something. Kelly would know his name. He's like a musician, light-skinned guy, and he was a kind of producer, and he made a film. And I remember just realizing that I was kind of that's it. That I was immersed in London and often didn't really know all of these things and these movements and these events that took place around in the city that I'm born in. And so Black History Month had a purpose for me. It was cultural, it wasn't so much political. I would go just to find out about the landscape I was part of. And I remember that event particularly just because it really was a kind of eye-opening for me. But Black History Month, and this kind of getting to my point, Black History Month seems to have just been a starting point. That seems to have been the intention for it, right? It was meant to signal something more. Because Black history, and we can take this to Gilroy's work, and we take this to C.L.I. James's work, Black history was meant to be, or is most powerful as a theoretical tool, as a framework for seeing the world. It's not bits and pieces of components that we can kind of dip into and celebrate, but it's a way of seeing world history. And so Black History Month, for me, should have signaled this new way of seeing all history, right? And not this kind of normative white history, but all of our histories, and thinking about this kind of postmodern or modern kind of moment. But we seem to have stalled on Black history. and it seems to have just become cultural, and it's very safe, once a month thing. And with that starting point should have signaled something more, but 30 years later, we don't seem to have progressed very far. I think the aim should have been for this kind of history, this kind of framework, this kind of critical engagement should have fed through all of our kind of curricula, through all of our kind of cultural practices. And perhaps that's still taking place. Perhaps it's still quite early for that. But in this decolonial moment, apparently this decolonial moment, I worry that we haven't, that we're here again in the month of October celebrating this or having this conversation as opposed to having it in May or June or whatever day, and really just constantly tackling this kind of work. I worry that we're just still at the starting point. And so for me, Black History Month has perhaps lost those origins that Kelly was speaking about, and it's just a very safe celebration of little bits and pieces, and that's not necessarily the kind of Black history or Black theory, Black framework that I'm particularly interested in. I'm sorry, that's really putting a bit of a downer on the discussion, but yeah.
Okay, I just want to thank you for that, Nathan and Jessica. I just want to sort of moving into the contemporary, and I wanted to pick up on Nathan, what you said about the way that you view Black History Month as a ghettoization of Black history, that it's supposed to have been a starting point, it's supposed to have provided a framework, it's supposed to have segued onto something broader, and we're sort of kind of stuck now. So I wanted to invite the other panelists in to think about or to respond to that, but also just to bring in our, as I mentioned in the opening, our current circumstances or what we're currently dealing with. So of course, the global pandemic, we've heard about health inequalities. We know that Black and brown people are affected, at least in terms of in the West, affected disproportionately higher than or sort of more severe symptoms and greater rates of getting or contracting COVID. We know about that, we've heard about that. We also are in a moment of reckoning with race and racial injustice. And so again, thinking back to those activist roots of Black History Month, where are we now with it? And could this be the moment to rethink or reignite, given all that's happening around us? And I wonder if you could each draw on your own, whether it's research experience, to speak to that, and to also think about this idea of it sort of possibly having got stuck.
All right, shall I take a dip in first? Thank you for that question, Louisa. I'll try and address it. So I think I spoke a little bit about, and somebody mentioned it in the Q&A, about Black History Month coming from the ashes of the GLC and the Tory abolition of London's democratically elected government. And you're thinking about this particular moment that we're in. It's that same moment that was there 30 years ago. It's that same moment that was there for Carter G. Woodson in the 1920s. And indeed, it's the same moment that was there for the students of Kent State University when they demanded Black or a Black History Week and then a Black History Month in the 1970s. Just to speak a bit more broadly in the context of 1987, or just to touch on a few things that is important to mention. 1984 was the GLC declared the year of anti-racism. One of the ways that a lot of London councils addressed that was to rename buildings after Black and Asian people, was to commission new public art depicting issues and depicting by Black artists, Black and Asian artists, and depicting issues and individuals that were relating to Black and Asian history. We got in Lambeth anyway, we got Mary Seacole House, we got Olive Morris House, we got Max Roach Park, we got the Angela Davis Industrial Estate. Almost all of those things are now gone through successive regeneration, the council selling off public owned property. So, you know, even our view of this moment of iconoclasm in 2020, that was going on in 1987 as well. The other thing that it's important to mention is that 1987 was also in a broader context of the African liberation movement. It was really the peak of the anti-apartheid movement in the UK, but it was also very much in the wake of the Black liberation or the African liberation and armed struggles that was going on throughout the 1970s and 80s as well. So it's very much within that broader context. Oftentimes when I think about what is the use of Black history, or what is the use of African history, it brings me back to thinking about an African Guyanese historian called Walter Rodney. And to put it very succinctly, the use of African history is for African liberation. The use of Black history and the use of Black History Month should be for the continuing struggle for Black liberation, the continuing struggle to have our humanity, or to assert our humanity, I should say. And then finally, I want to encourage you to think outside of an Anglophone context. I think let me just have a look at my list here very quickly. November sees Black Consciousness Day in Brazil, which is on the 20th of November to commemorate it commemorates the birthday of a African freedom fighter in Brazil called Zumbi, who was the leader of a free community of Africans. You have the, oh, this is really going to test my Spanish. I'll do it in English, that will save me. You have Afro-Descendants Month in Uruguay, which is in May. You have the Afro-Peruvian Month, which is in June. You have the National Day for Afro-Ecuadorian people, which is in October in Ecuador. Surprise, surprise. So there's this, oftentimes which frustrates me a little, is that we have kind of this very siloed view of these various initiatives that African heritage people all around the world have taken to lay a stake in the kind of temporal nature of the year to assert, to celebrate, to demand. And then finally, I want to encourage you to find out a little bit more about the 1st of August. The 1st of August is probably one of the first, maybe, international days in which people of African descent have asserted and demanded their freedom. The 1st of August was the day that the abolition of Slavery Act was passed in the parts of the British Empire. But it came to be adopted, reused as a festival of freedom for people of African descent all around the world. And it's important to remember that when Emancipation Day, the 1st of August, happened in the British Empire, African chattel slavery was still continuing throughout much of the New World. So that became an international festival of freedom for people of African descent. We have kind of, that has kind of fallen from memory now over the past 200 or so years. But whether it's Black History Month, whether it's Afro-Peruvian Month, whether it's Emancipation Day, and I should also recognize that today, the 12th of October, is Indigenous Peoples Day, which has been a reclaiming of Columbus Day, which used to be commemorated or celebrated all around the Americas, which again, people have been reclaiming as a day to recognize the presence, let alone the presence of Indigenous people in the Americas. So all the you know, there are all these contestations of these different dates, these different points in the calendar, and they are very often time in flux, very often time falling in and out of memory, but very much, I think, always embedded and found and with this foundation of political activism.
So Jessica, Nathan, do you want to either respond to what Khalees just presented or just build on the question I posed to you? if you can remember it.
Yeah, actually, just a quick thing to Kelly, just because we're kind of, you know, Independence Day in the U.S. as well has been reclaimed as Juneteenth in the U.S. as well, and I think there's been a lot of conversation around it, and just a lot of moving kind of the dial forwards, and a lot of that doesn't fall out of memory, as you say, which I completely agree with. Just to kind of go back to something that Nathan said that struck me, and maybe to respond to your last question, Louisa, is his claim about it being safe, that Black History Month is a safe month. And I don't think safe in the sense for us, but I think safe in the sense of our white counterparts, of those who are happy to support and to provide resource to the activities and to moments that we have in the recognition and celebration, but also those challenging discussions that we often have to have in order to really take a stake in what we're trying to achieve. So I think that really struck me in the way that you noted that, Nathan, around the safety, because I often feel that these types of events are happily approved and are happily supported if they fall in October or in February. But if it's anything outside of those months, really the resource or the funding is just not there in my experience, which I think, you know, says a lot about the ambivalence of our white counterparts to really support some of the initiatives that we are trying to promote in a lot of the activities that go on. In saying that, it's not that I don't want to recognize, you know, the impact or the, you know, the significance of these months, but it's, again, as I was saying before, it's really about this work happening throughout and not being forgotten, and us not really losing the momentum just because the year or the month has passed by. So as you were saying, Kelly, you were talking about sort of the Jubilee year of the Africans, and also, you know, other significant moments throughout history that one will dedicate, you know, renaming artwork and buildings, but then yet over 2 years' time, you know, you see sort of kind of a lackluster effort to kind of promote that, or resources again dwindle. I'm talking about embeddedness and being able to commit not just a day, not a month, not a week, but a lifetime of eradicating racism, a lifetime of ensuring that all people are equal, because we all have been created equal. And for me, that's where I really kind of get, I guess, stuck as well, is that, you know, you're trying to work within a system, particularly one like the higher education system, and you know, you're in the institution itself, you're in with the processes and the policies, but then at the same time you're trying to make you're trying to shift sort of the cultural attitude towards a lot of these initiatives, and I find that quite jarring at times. And again, it's just where I'm at with this. So I'm the one who perpetuates these kind of activities, but then I know it's because it's the one time that I'm allowed to, the one time that it gets supported, the one time that it does get recognized enough to be safe and to carry that on. So that's my little response. I hope that was helpful, but a lot more complex for me.
Yeah, I mean, I've partly forgotten your initial question, Lisa. But Kelly, I do, and this kind of builds on Jessica's idea as well. I really do like this idea of Indigenous Peoples Day as this kind of contemporary thing. There's this potential for something new, right? Because it's very present. It's a reclaiming of this day, but that's just symbolic. What the conversation that can kind of emerge from that? Well, why has it changed? What's going on? There's a debate to be had, and a real kind of revolution in the kind of understanding the history of what took place. Right? We get to remove the veil, right? This veneer that has existed. If we keep this conversation going, if we challenge it, and if we put it into academia, if we put it into the schools and the curricula, there is so much potential, just as I imagine there was 30 years ago for Black History Month, to have a really radical conversation. But as Jessica says, I fear it just becomes one of those moments, and in 2, 3, 4 years' time, it just kind of slides on by, and we seem to, and that worries me. I guess that tells me about the dominance of this normative history, aka white history, and its ability to, like capitalism, to just absorb, to soften, to make safe, and just to gently push aside as this kind of dominant train kind of goes through. And there just seems to be so much work that needs to be done. Sorry, Louisa, if you want to repeat what your initial question was, I'll try and answer that.
No, that's fine. Let the conversation just evolve.
Can I respond to Jessica quickly, just on a personal note? Nobody's seeing my face on the screen.
I can see your face.
Oh, can you? Oh, I can't see my own face. So, personally, I tend to refer to Black History Month as Black Exhaustion Month or Black Employment Month. It feels as though it's the time of year everybody wants their project delivered, an event happening, all the stuff I want to go to is happening on the same day, and I end up just having to take most of November off because I'm exhausted. So the way that personally I deal with that is that the only events I do during Black History Month is events about Black History Month, because personally I feel as though it's a context that we all need to know more about. One of the things I find particularly frustrating is I'm a freelancer, right? So people approach me in order to deliver projects. A lot of corporates approach me for Black History Month, end of August if I'm lucky, but for most it's an afterthought that's happening sometime in September. So my own personal pushback around that is that I only talk about Black History Month and Black History Month. That's kind of, so Louisa was fortunate with the theme of this one. And then the other thing about Indigenous Peoples Day or the 12th of October, not only did the 12th of October signal the beginnings of the genocide for the indigenous people of the Americas, it also signaled the establishment of slave societies for the people that would be trafficked as racialized chattel slaves into the New World. And one of the things that has been suggested in kind of how we think about Columbus Day as it was, is to think about it as International Reparations Day. What will that look like if it's a moment to think about what repair for the descendants of enslaved Africans looks like, what repair for our societies looks like, you know, in trying to address the destruction and the trauma of racialized slavery. So, you know, we have all these different opportunities during the year, so to speak, to resist, to push back, to invert, to challenge who and what is remembered. But I fully agree that every October can feel so exhausting and so demoralizing to a certain extent, so dehumanizing to a certain extent, that the way I center myself is to be quite narrow in kind of what I do.
I think that's a really important perspective to take on. I mean, it's particularly given the nature of the work that you do, Kelly, that there is this immense interest building up to October, and then it sort of cuts off. So it gives us in a sort of practical sense of how Black history is being engaged with and maybe disengaged with the rest of the year. So just to sort of pull together some of the strands of thought that came out of that's coming out of the conversation. There is this inherent tension, it seems, between the activist roots of Black History Month and the way in which it's been adopted and the way in which it plays out in our wider society and our institutions. But at the same time, there is this sense of possibility. I mean, sort of drawing on examples of engagement with Black history and Black identities and African history across the world. So Kelly kind of gave us a global vision and took us to South America and took us to other places to give a sense of other ways of engaging, or alternative ways of engaging. And we sort of spoke a bit about Indigenous Peoples Day and that as a site of possibility, and then the thought of reparations. And so in the conversation, as we looked up to other places and think beyond the way in which Black History Month currently is sort of incarnated in this space, it sort of moves us into a conversation about the future. So in as much as, Nathan, you feel like it's kind of a ghettoized way of engaging, there is also in this conversation a sense of alternatives that are possible. So maybe could you all speak to just maybe briefly on how you see Black History Month now, like in our kind of current space in Britain in maybe not 2020, because this is probably a very, very unusual Black History Month, given that we're all in our houses, but generally in the last sort of few years, but also what your vision for it in the future could be. And I know that Kelly's already taken us to other parts of the world, but in terms of in the UK context specifically, what should we be doing differently? I mean, Jessica, you mentioned about sort of embedding this in your work, but also still being pulled back into the kind of cycle, the year cycle, and Black History Month being the focal point. So what's the next step? And that's not necessarily for us to do as individuals, but collectively, what do we do next?
This is a good question. Thank you, Louisa. This kind of taps into my own research, and I don't know if this is in direct connection to Black History Month, but I'm looking at the way in which communities, particularly the Atlantic world, the African Atlantic kind of world, from South America to Central to US, Caribbean, and us over here in Europe and parts of West Africa. I'm interested in how we are sharing history and talking about the past and have this sense of a memory, this sense of kind of collective culture with kind of localization and specification in there. And I observe online, particularly the way in which we talk about our past, share our past, are increasingly producing content about our culture and our history and who we are. And I do see a quake taking place. I'm not always in favor of some of the things that I see, particularly the kind of rarefication of race again in all of this kind of, and I've spoken to Kelly and Louisa about this at length, and my kind of reticence around the rarefication of race and some of the stuff that I see emerging from the Black Atlantic world. But I am also excited by this quake, this ability to communicate across nations in some, this ability to kind of communicate across nations in this kind of vast landscape that in some ways, sometimes it lacks the kind of political galvanization that we might like, but then sometimes it actually does have that. And so in some ways, I feel like that might make something like Black History Month a little bit redundant at some point. But perhaps Black History Month has its place in these types of institutions that we're all part of. But culturally, collectively, across vast landscapes, we are sharing and talking and exchanging and challenging each other in a way that we haven't done for a long time. So I'm optimistic about that. I'm fascinated by what's taking place in those spaces. Maybe there'll be a tipping point where it begins to, and it already has begun to reach these institutions, like this decolonial moment that we're in, this Black Lives Matter moment that we're in, is really part of that effort that has been taking place in these kind of external spaces, these places outside of these institutions. I'd like to see where that goes. I guess that's the thing that kind of grabs me in this conversation. Sorry if I was a bit muffled.
Yeah. No, thank you for that, Nathan. And yeah, very interesting question. I do agree. And the vision for how it could be, or the vision in which I hope perhaps maybe future BHMs might be, or whether they would even exist. I mean, that's something I'm still questioning. Maybe to kind of go back to a couple of the questions that I see, and I know we can talk about it, but it's also around priorities and emphasis. And just speaking back to what you were saying, Kelly, about exhaustion, why is it that always the one person who has anything to do with race equality always has to be the host or the organizer or the convener, and just sort of this sense of like we have to take the burden on our shoulders. And something about our city network for racial justice that I think has been, I think, really showcases the evolution of our network as staff members within this institution, is our sense of putting the responsibility not on ourselves but the others who can make change happen, and making sure that they understand that it's not just our problem, but it's their problem. And that's how I would want to see Black History Month reimagined, that the disproportionate burden of the work that we do is not always on our shoulders, but that we carry it, that we share it, and that we see others making it a priority for themselves because they see the value in it. So just to kind of think about that vision, it's around me not having to organize or you having to organize, but it's about all of us organizing, and it's an institutional mandate that it's organized in a concerted and collective manner. And I think that was, you know, the thinking around sort of creating the week and the month within the United States, is that this is not just one singular group's problem, but it's our collective problem. And really just making sure that people understand it, that this is an important moment of history that should not be forgotten, but it's because we have value and we have a stake in this as well. So that's how I would reimagine sort of the work being done.
Yeah, can I just say that I entirely agree with that. This is all of our issue or history. This really does concern every single one of us, and in some ways, the current Black History Month just makes it this very safe little project that Black people get to do, and we get to clap for you. Well done. But no, this is about the history of modernity and the Atlantic world as we exist in it, or the globe as we exist in it. This impacts every single one of us. And so when we ghettoize Black history in this kind of way, and we make it safe, we miss out on its potential to actually provide serious kind of counter narratives. And the same for Indigenous people's histories and such and such and such. So I entirely agree with that point.
Yeah, and for me to, you know, the future of Black History Month is when there doesn't need to be a Black History Month. I think that's I think the world that hopefully that we'll be moving towards over the next few decades, if not centuries. And this is a world that is, you know, that works to repair itself, whether that be spiritual repair, whether that be economic repair, whether that be environmental repair. You know, this is a reparative process that we're all involved in, and that for me, you cannot divorce the repair necessary, not only for the people and the societies that were affected in the aftermath of the racialized chattel slavery, but also for the colonized territories and people themselves. So, you know, the future of Black History Month is when there isn't any need to have a Black History Month.
Thank you all. I think I'm going to invite Jenny to just offer up some responses to what we've been discussing. I mean, this event is the brainchild really of Jenny, who was asking some pertinent questions around Black History Month, and so it evolved into a broader discussion that's brought us all here this evening. So Jenny, if you want to share your thoughts about what's been discussed, and then panelists, you know, if you want to then follow up on what Jenny raises, please feel free. And then I think we'll move over to the Q&A with the wider audience.
First, I want to thank you again. I repeat myself, but it's been very enlightening. And I'm going to give you also the context of where I'm speaking from. I have a dual heritage, none of which incorporates Black Month's history. I'm part of this diasporic Black bodies that was raised in France, where such a concept doesn't exist. And my West African heritage, Senegal, Black History Month is something that is just like, what are you talking about? It was out of also of a genuine curiosity about this celebration, but also one that was one point that was very interesting for me to hear at the very beginning of a conversation, and I think it's you, Kelly, who raised it, is how the ideal of and the motivation and the aspiration of this celebration was founded in a very Pan-Africanist perspective, right? And so, again, it's going to be a bit disconnected, so please try to follow me. This history, Black history, like for me, it's, you know, and that's a conversation that we had off record with other colleagues. It is word history, right? Like if we ask the first time like human civilization actually strived to survive its environment, it was on the African continent. The first trace of human nature it was Lucy. So so we are basically talking, and a friend of mine was using the expression of a strand in a DNA. So this persistence of having a month celebrating you know, Black heritage, for me makes sense when it is about, and I'm very grateful that you reminded the learnings of Ronnie, it's when we're about using this Black history to foster Black liberation, right? And while it might have been at the origin of the event and of the celebration, I'm left wondering how far this event is about thinking a new word post, how do you call that? A new word for Black people and Blackness as a post-state community that doesn't take as reference Britain or US, but that is very much about addressing and recognizing the conditions for reconciliation of a global Blackness. And I love that you pick and brought in different ways and alternatives of celebrating, because for me, these are where the conversations needs to be in terms of not celebrating us just yet, but understanding us and building our community beyond the trauma of capitalism, beyond the trauma of slavery and colonialism. And I'm not just saying beyond, but like having real conversations about and capacity across different Black communities to speak about this trauma. And that's something that I'm not sure I'm seeing how far the Black Month celebration is doing, right? So who is the audience at the end of the day of this Black Month history, you know? I loved your expression, Kelly, of Black exhaustion and, you know, and Black employment, you know? Like, what do you do and how can we help you? And it's just like, I'm tired of being the leader in this. I'm not supposed to be the ally. I was having the conversation with the network before. We're not supposed to seek allyship for this celebration, right? This, if it's recognized as such as word history, this is your problem, and we can help because, I mean, we got some kind of experiences and expertise that we are willing to, you know, to make you benefit from. So I have this very tedious ambivalence with the celebration in what it could be and what it could be for us genuinely, because it's needed. And you know, Louisa, you say maybe not now because 2020 Black History Month is different from what it was, you know, in previous year, and maybe exactly now, maybe 2020 is the time we reset, you know, we reset the shuffling of the cards, and we have like a real talk in terms of how far this serves us or serve something else, right? And how far we can really engage in those unaddressed tensions, in those unresolved tensions, and those conflicts that exist within the body of and the community, the Black community. How can this become an opportunity for genuine conversations, rather than, you know, a tokenism of ticking the box of we've been celebrated this year, thank you very much, next. And And yeah, I guess, so that's an immediate reaction, and I'd love to hear from you again on these, because I feel it was resonating in what you were saying, but also I'm coming from a quite distinctive background in this regard. And well, so yeah, maybe I'll let you reply, and then there's questions that emerge from both our NRJ members, but also from the audience that also resonate with what I just articulated here. So if there's immediate reaction to what I just sort of just shared.
I mean, that was beautiful, and I pretty much agree with most of what you're saying. Sorry, I hope you can hear me. One of the things that I found interesting about this idea of this kind of almost Atlantic conversation that needs to kind of take place, right? That we can begin to kind of talk. What interested me is a conversation that I've had with Louise on a number of occasions and Kelly on a number of occasions, is where, and I know it was on the questions initially, is where political blackness falls into that, right? Because blackness in the UK, as Black History Month emerges, blackness is a political term, right? So I wonder, Kelly perhaps could answer, I wonder what was the kind of tension between those two things at the time, and how perhaps they've been resolved. Kelly.
Sorry, just trying to find all my buttons. Thank you so much for that reflection, Jenny. And I guess one of the things I wrote down as a result of what you said was the idea of a global African identity. What does it mean to be a global African? What does it mean to be a diasporan African? And I would argue that it goes actually beyond the Atlantic world. You know, I think it's very important to recognize people of African descent in the Pacific world and their influence in the Indian Ocean world. But to touch on this issue of blackness, political blackness, as it is in the UK context, which for those of you who don't know was a term of solidarity of any colonized people to begin to identify as Black. Oh, so I think Nathan mentioned that a point of tension in 1987. Not so much, because things were beginning to move out of political blackness by 1987. And Black History Month is very much embedded in the African Jubilee year, in Pan-Africanism, in a Garveyite view of the world. I think it's important to remember that when we think about who was the founder of Black History Month, it was a Ghanaian man. When we think about who was by his side, it was a Afro-Trinidadian man, and it was a woman of mixed Jewish and Nigerian heritage. So, you know, even amongst those initial organizers, there was a lot of diversity within their experiences. So I think whilst we talk about blackness as a term of solidarity, or blackness as a unified identity for people who are other than African descent, for me, a useful way of thinking about that is to think about Haiti in the post-revolutionary moment. And in Haiti, the first and the only successful slave revolt that established a free society, the first nation in the Americas to abolish slavery, the first Black nation in the Americas as well. They decided that as a means of creating equality amongst all the people of Haiti, or Haiti, that would be to say that everybody is Black, no matter if you're European, no matter if you're of mixed heritage. The way that they recognized the equality that everybody had as a citizen of Haiti was to say that they're all Black. So, you know, I think very much in the 1980s moment, that is something that they were also striving towards, that baseline of equality was to say that everybody is Black. You know, and people find terms of solidarity that are of use to them in that moment. So in this moment, a useful term may be people of color, a useful term may be BIPOC. In another 10 years, there may be another term of use to express solidarity, to express a kind of shared experience. And that change and switch in language is fine. There are people for whom they hate the term Black History Month. For them, it should be African History Month. And the Black identity isn't something that they that they have. They think of themselves as African. So, you know, I think these are important things to think about and important things to know. For me, fundamentally, personally, I feel as though I embody all those things at the same time. And just to close in thinking about the decolonial moment, and even I have issues and struggles sometimes with the term decolonial. And part of the reason for that is what are we silencing by using the term decolonial? And for me, we're silencing the fact that we're still living in a very colonized world. We're still living in a world in which, you know, thinking about the vast swathes of the world that are still part of the British Empire, that are still British colonies. How can we, without thinking about the Chagos Islanders who have been stripped of their land, without thinking about even, you know, Martinique and Guadeloupe and brothers and sisters in France, in the Caribbean who are in France, without thinking about people in French Guiana, you know, we are still living in a very colonized context. And that is kind of a literal colonized context. So, yeah, so where is the space to have conversations about that in Black History Month? And I think all too often, there isn't a lot of history in Black History Month, and that can be a bit frustrating for me, but that's how it goes.
Jessica, do you want to...
As always, Kelly just blows it all away. She's like, you know how to put words right into you just know how to contextualize everything, which I really appreciate, Kelly. And Nathan, thank you for just pointing out just how complex it is and not straightforward. I think for me, my reaction to what you summarized, Jenny, really, I mean, yes, it has to be more of a global identity, and I understand that. But just kind of in the last wrap up of what Kelly said, we do live in a very colonial environment, in a colonial setting, and that's, I think, again, it's that tension that I feel working within a system like this one in the UK or in the US. It's the struggle in which, how do you separate yourself, or do you need to separate it, or how do you get around sort of the obstacles, the roadblocks, and the challenges that we face in order to push forward agendas? Because again, it all does get very political in the very end about who wants to assert dominance, who wants to keep the status quo. So yeah, I mean, just on a personal note, so I also identify myself as Afro-Latina. My mother's from El Salvador. I'm visibly African looking compared to her. And, you know, and it's just now that, you know, my Afro-Latina brothers and sisters are starting to take this terminology on and understanding their African roots and how, you know, their families are descendants of Africans coming from their mother continents. And, you know, and I guess the interesting thing is that, you know, a lot of us are really trying to identify and find our ways back to where we actually come from in Africa. And that in itself, you know, I think when we start having this more global understanding of each other, I think will help to kind of promote sort of more power, because there's more power in numbers. And I just, you know, generally, you know, it's been always a very difficult kind of experience for me, not always feeling sort of like fully Latina because I didn't look as Latina, you know, question mark, or fully Black because I didn't look fully Black. And I think these things, you know, are some of the conversations that need to be had as well, as far as, you know, how do we identify ourselves. And, you know, as you were saying earlier, you know, depending on the time of day, you can identify as all of them or none of them at all. And I think it's just about being flexible and open to the way that, you know, sort of these labels, if you want to call them that, or these abilities to kind of identify with certain groups, it does matter in the end of the day.
Thank you for your reaction. And yes, I think those conflicts within, or tensions within and in the current context that, yes, is still, you know, very much colonized. And you say literally, Kelly, like a physical colonial experience of coloniality, but not just only. And, you know, I was very amazed by the silence of the African continent throughout May, June. And I was just like, what, how come we don't feel concerned? How come we don't? And same, I was, you know, as a West African living in South Africa during xenophobic times, you realize, how come we're not having conversations that we ought to have? And so to build this, you know, ideally this community of solidarity, whatever the labels, the terms that we want to refer to. There are different questions that have been popping up and that are aligned based on what has been discussed. And I'm gonna start with a couple and see if we can get a round of answers. And I'm putting them a bit together. One has to do with a question that regards the UK institutions that still perpetuates the suffering of so-called BME, Black people, people of color, however you want to refer to. So whether through different institutions, whether police, court system, employment, but we may want to add higher education. And the question is, who will hold these institutions to account in the long term, and how far those questions are part of the conversation that we're having during the Black History Month. Another comment, and that is aligned to this reflection, is there's you know, that's the word is ripe and hearing us, and that we've been having enough conversations already, and what should basically, again, this question around accountability and action and what it looks like in the future, what it can look like in the future. And so, and I think like that is linked to this two question of, you know, practical accountability of social and societal social institutions. A question that is about and I read it, following the high profile of Black Lives Matters in recent months, do we think that this has helped to ensure that Black issues are not simply focused upon during Black History Month? So I guess it's more the inscription of this debate in a everyday context and beyond this specific temporality of this month. Anyone wants to jump in?
I mean, I don't think I can answer the question of accountability and how we hold abstract institutions and abstract history to account. I don't know about these types of things. And as I was speaking with Louisa initially, going into this conversation, I am in a state of flux in which I have never been in before around particular ideas around race, political activism. And I have simply lost a sense of the answers in a way that I've never experienced before. And I'm part of that is probably because of COVID and the political climate, but also around my reticence around race, how we conceptualized Blackness, Black people, and of course the Black Lives Matter and the wider kind of decolonial moment. I'm at a loss. I really am, and it's unsettling. I'm hoping that it basically will pass and ideas will emerge again. But as you were saying about this question of accountability, all I could think about is just that power concedes nothing, and not even without a demand, but it just concedes nothing without power. And And I guess that's what motivates me. We could have all of these conversations for as long as we want, and we could ask for conversations and debates to be taking place. But yeah, this power needs something more to get the things that we want. Wherever it is, as communities across this kind of Atlantic world and beyond, we just need more. And I just, yeah. So I don't know about questions of accountability or asking for it. I don't know if that's useful anymore. It's not useful for me at this present moment. It may be, and I may circle back around to that kind of way of doing it. But for now, I think about power, and I think about how I probably need some in order to get the things that I want, and that moves out towards my community as well. That was really not helpful, I know, I'm sorry.
I don't think it's unhelpful. I think, Nathan, it's very telling, actually. And it goes back to the conversation who's carrying the luggage of finding solutions, right? And it says, because I think we there's a majority of us who feel burdened already, and to say and repeat and expose issues, and yet being returned with another question of, okay, so how do we do it? And it's just like it's like a very cynical vicious cycle, but also exhausting cycle, going back to this month of exhaustion that Kelly talked about.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Jess.
No, I'm not going to add anything further than what Nathan has already expressed, because it's exactly how I feel as well. It's, I don't have the answers to that. And, it's it's almost kind of like, maybe I'm not going to speak on your behalf, Nathan, but it feels like you're almost in a powerless position to enact the power to change things. And yeah, it's kind of a chicken and egg situation, or the dilemma. It's, you can ask for it, but are they going to give it to you readily? What's in it for them? And it's just sort of having that imagination or ability to think creatively and finding the solutions. But again, it's always kind of put back on us, isn't it? Like, so what should we do about it? What can you do? Can you tell us what to do? And then we'll do it. But that's not what we want, or that's not what I want. It's about really having this authentic, reciprocal sort of desire to make this change together, as I was saying earlier, around this collectiveness of approach, that it all matters to us, that we all benefit in the end. And it's really just thinking through that. I don't think I've arrived to any solution whatsoever around that. So respectfully apologize.
But not apologize. That's okay. There's one question comment that actually is going in the same direction of both of your comments, that says, is it fair to say that we're speaking to the converted when we share our thoughts with peers at even like this, and white colleagues institution really need to step up? A couple of questions, and this time is rather than turn. I like the temporality. I'm a geographer, so I'm all about spatiality, but I'm among historians, so I had to keep up today. And I love the temporality and of the conversation. And so Louisa organized, past, present, future. And so turning a bit towards the future and what it can hold for us. Two questions that I found especially relevant, and I will share with you, is what, in your view, would be the final point of Black History Month, i.e. at what stage do you think it would have accomplished all that it was initially set out to? And following up on this, over time and across the world, do you think what it means to be Black has changed? is there a freedom or a challenge in trying to retain a single definition of this multifarious experience identity? And equally, is there freedom or risk in the opposite of having an open or individualistic definition of what it means to be Black? So I think it speaks back to the notion of labels, but also my shout outs of building, at least, addressing the distinctive trauma across Black communities within a Black community. Who wants to jump in?
I'll jump in quickly, but not that I can remember either of those questions. Well, I guess to quickly answer the final one, has what it means to be Black changed over time? Yes. Is it going to continue to change? Yes. We were talking about terms of, or I was talking about terms of solidarity. Black is also a term of solidarity. It's a term of solidarity among a diversity of African people. There is a huge amount of diversity of African people, of African descended people, and Black is our term of solidarity, in which we recognize the similarities of our condition in the world as it presents itself today. But I was thinking about both the frustration that both Jessica and Nate, or not even frustration, the exhaustion, the resignation of Jessica and Nathan to the system, and I'm also somewhat resigned to it as well. And thinking about some of the questions that people had about institutions, I think, and how to hold institutions to account. I think it's important to reflect that institutions, I've not got my Janet Jackson microphone down, sorry. I think it's important to reflect on the fact that institutions were established to not change, that they were established to be stable, to be permanent. They're not agents for change. So if we're looking for our institutions to bring that change, then in my opinion, you're looking in the wrong place. Black History Month there is no central organizing committee for Black History Month. All the Black folk don't get around together and decide what to do every October. There is no central government funding. It is an initiative that was started in 1987 that people have continued. And one of the things that they did is that they had the African Jubilee Year Declaration, in which, I guess, in their attempts to hold London's local authorities to account, they were encouraging London's local authorities to sign up to this African Jubilee Year Declaration. And one of the things that they signed up to was this embedding Black History Month into their program. And that was an attempt to bring about curriculum change. And we're still in that demand for curriculum change today. And I guess this brings back around to this, people wanting to be told how to solve things. I have no idea how to solve things. I think there was a question about allyship. Allies want to know how to help, but for me, the term ally isn't that useful a term. I'm looking for someone to be an accomplice. I'm looking for people to take the initiative to disrupt, to bring about change, to really be disobedient and to be undisciplined. And that is the only way that change comes. And change may come slow. It's taken us 600 years to get into this particular predicament. I'm assuming that it will take us an equal amount of time to bring about something better, hopefully. But that's the journey that we're on.
I love this idea of asking for an accomplice, right? And being disobedient, not for us, not for Black people, right? Because again, these systems of inequality and inequity that exist, and this exploitation that exists, impacts every single one of us. So you're an ally for us. You need to be an accomplice for yourself, because we live in this world, this unequal, unjust world. And so we shouldn't have to inform so-called allies. They should come to us. We should try to formulate with them. Look at the world around you, open up your goddamn eyes and do what you must. And if you ever have to engage, for me personally, in a conversation with a group of people where you're explaining the stuff to them, that's a lost cause. Do not waste your life doing that kind of stuff. There are so much better things to be doing rather than explaining to white people or other people or even black people how they should, but just you do you. I'm looking for accomplices, people who are ready to take this kind of journey with me. I find that notion of allies ridiculous. And it's patronizing. It's patronizing to a large number of white people who are out there just being radical, doing stuff, disrupting because they know that that's what they want to do. I wouldn't engage in the idea of allyship. I don't find it useful at all. May I go back to the point about blackness? I think it was about, is it useful? And it kind of leads on to a number of conversations we've had. It kind of relates to a number of conversations. The idea of the silence that we heard from Africa, the continent, over the last few months, the silence in South Africa from the kind of xenophobia, the fact that they're not discussing this continued colonization of Martinique and Guadeloupe, which, you know, is debatable, but I'll concede it for you. And so I wanted to think about the way in which American blackness, this hegemonic power that Black Americanness is part of, how it dominates the kind of landscape. It dominates the notion of what Black history is and what the Black past is. And I think that's really important. I'm fascinated by what's coming out of Brazil at the moment, but I am also concerned about the way in which the African-American notion of Blackness is being transmitted to those places and to other places. And it's not to say that they have a right notion of Blackness. They have a localized notion of their racial configuration. It's nonsense, but it is what it is for them, just like we all have these nonsense versions of race in our different places. And so I think it's important to kind of realize that the Blackness that's in vogue is coming from a very particular place, a kind of English-speaking place, US at the center to the periphery, UK, and then everybody seems to be falling in line through this kind of communications power that we currently have. And this is a transmission. This is not something indigenous in these local places. It's often a transmission. There are exchanges, and they have been historically, but in the contemporary, I think, understanding Blackness as coming from a very particular type of center is important for me. I'll leave it there. Kelly's laughing at me. I'm on a run.
Kelly, do you want to share?
Who, me? I find Nathan's funny, that's all. No, yeah, I don't really have anything more to say apart from what I just said. You know, to me, Blackness is a technical term that it's a term of use today. It may be something else tomorrow. You know, it's a term that means different things in different places at different times to different people, and I'm okay with that. And I think that's perfectly fine. I do, one of the things that I think language is a significant barrier. It's interesting that we have a Francophone and a Hispanic person here, which is unusual in the UK, even though the UK has significant communities of Lusophone and Francophone and Hispanic people of African descent. But I very rarely hear those voices in events that I go to, and then thinking about, you know, how are those communities experiencing Blackness in the UK. So, you know, in the future, I think, you know, what would it be like if there were better communications across languages for people of African descent to speak about their experiences and their experiences and their Black identities. And that's something that I am looking forward to. And I should say, one thing that I am particularly looking forward to is as we begin to have a reckoning with memorialization, you know, and as much as my heart leapt to see Colston dashing at the harbour, that I made me feel good to see him there in the water. You know, why are we not talking to the iconoclasm that's going on in Martinique and Guadeloupe in the same way that we're recognizing the stuff that's happening in the US? Why are we not talking about the movements in Trinidad, in Jamaica, in Brazil, to address memorialization and public memory? Yeah, so I think, that, I think it goes back to Jenny, this what you were saying about a better recognition of African identities, Black identities that are not restricted by colonial borders, and that are not restricted by colonial languages, essentially. And how do we come to that, and kind of, and to bring it back to our Black History Month theme, how will that shift our understanding of what Black History Month could be and the possibilities of what it is? Right now, Black History Month in the UK is very much shaped around a Windrush narrative. And that is even a very narrow Windrush narrative. And even though we're living in, as I said, we're living in a particular context where we have people of African descent from all around the world in the UK, and the UK, in being a imperial capital for such a long time, has always had those connections with people of African descent from different parts of the world, but very seldomly do we get to hear and explore that.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I'm taking one more question, and it's interesting because with the question, there's always, you can read the subtext of the question. And so I'm going to read the question, translate the subtext of the question as I understand it, and ask for your inputs in a certain, in a specific direction. So the question is literally, how could Black History Month become repoliticized? And does this need to happen within mainstream? Obviously, the subtext is that Black History Month has become depoliticized, or what kind of politicization of this memorialization of this institutional device that has become Black History Month can we envisage? And that is more, if we want, that is more progressive or more aligned to what you just mentioned, Kelly, in terms of across states, across languages, across colonial experiences, but and towards reconciliation of different diasporic experiences, or at least conversations that tends towards this reconciliation. So you have the overall question about the depoliticized. You have the subtext about, has it become depoliticized? And the invitation of what ideally a politicized Black History Month would look like for the 2020 kids to come. Just like that.
Well, I'm going to jump in there first and I'm not left to last. So how does it become repoliticized? You repoliticize it. If you're looking for Sainsbury's to come with a political agenda for Black History Month, Sainsbury's ain't going to do it. So, if we want Black History Month to be around African liberation, which is therefore around the liberation of humanity, then that is the way that we need to do it. There is no, as I said before, there is no central Black History Month committee. There is no central pot of money. He who writes the check makes the rules. If you want to have a political event around Black History Month, then organize the event. Better still, you can do it in May. You can do it in January. You can do it in December. We can be pushing that. We can be trying to do that all year round. The other thing to mention on the kind of repoliticization tip is, and again, I think the same person asked this question right at the very beginning. So one of the reasons for Black that Black History Month was created in Britain was in resistance to conservative political ideology. Very interesting, they said. Yeah, very interesting, because we're still in a continuation of that right now with recent Tory policy about what resources can be used in school. So we still have a need for those alternatives. We still have a need to push back against oppression. And we can do it all year round, 365.
Yes. I'm all for the celebrating non-anniversary. So let's have non-Black History Months all year round and events that are attached to them. Nathan.
Yeah, I think I was just going to reiterate what Kelly said, basically, with a little bit more harsher and more cynically. I would discard the damn thing. I think that it had a very particular kind of purpose in its outset, and I think there was a very particular type of climate that made sense. But I think the moment that we're in now demands more. This kind of piecemeal ghettoizing of Black history, it just is. We're not in that moment anymore. I don't think that works. I don't think that's significant. I think the kind of political change that we need just run through our society more. We're more open to these types of conversations and these types of debates. I think we need something far more complex than this. So I'm happy to see the thing disappear, particularly if we start doing this more kind of complex types of work. And I think it is happening to some extent through the decolonial movement from Black Lives Matter and through this everyday kind of conversation that is taking place. It's probably not where I'd like it to be, but I do think it's more significant than Black History Month.
Sorry, one second. So, yeah, no, I agree with that 110%. I guess maybe this is for either you, Nathan, or Kelly, to kind of correct my understanding of kind of the policies here in the UK. But from my understanding from the origins of Black History Month, in particular here in this country, was to give teeth to the Race Relations and Equality Acts. So, and in like the same form in the US, when Black History Month, originated, when it did, it was also around civil rights and the movements that were created based on the inequalities that were just disproportionate in the US. So despite having all of these amendments and mandates and acts, you still see the same inequalities occurring decade in and decade out. And, I think this is really about doing something new and more radical. And I think kind of going back to the point about it being a safe time for us to express our views and to share our experiences, I think it's about setting the agenda differently and taking a real different approach in not just educating and creating awareness, but really demanding change and action. And I know I can't answer the question about who's accountable and who has the power to do what, but it's really about, again, being imaginative about creative solutions. And I don't suspect that this panel will be able to do that. But I think the conversation that we're having needs to continue to happen throughout the year, that, we should not leave it to October or February. I'm sure I'm going to do something in February too, because I still have contacts in the States. But the point is that we need to continue to avail ourselves of us leading these conversations and really putting it on others to be responsible for it. So, I mean, maybe that's not a clear, succinct way of capturing my thoughts, but that's all I could really add.
I think that's very succinct, and that's very good and very telling. I'm also conscious of the fact that, we've almost been speaking for 2 hours, and that there's always a bit of a screen fatigue that jumps in, especially when you're close to 7 p.m. And we were hopeful, but most importantly, we wanted to leave space for time to exchange on this topic. And I'm so grateful for the removal of the filter that you all played, you know, in this conversation. I want to leave maybe the floor for maybe some recap, concluding remarks as the brilliant moderator that Louisa has been for us today. We've been going in several directions. There's certainly things that I do take away from this conversation, and I hear, yeah, amen to or amen to all those non-anniversary of Black History Month and the conversations that are not in October and not in February, and that are beyond our zone of comforts, whether it's linguistically speaking or the state and nation that we identify and describe ourselves in. But yeah, so that would be for me the kind of, in one word, Black History Month Unfiltered takeaway message. But I'd like to hear from Louisa regarding this as a concluding maybe comments of this conversation.
Thanks, Jenny, and thank you all for this really engaging conversation. I'm going to just say a couple of things that I'm taking away from this. It's been quite a wide-ranging discussion, and in as much as the focus has been Black History Month as it came into being and as it's organized in the UK, I mean, our conversation has been very international, sort of reminding us also the Pan-African roots of Black History Month, and it seems that we're discussing, you know, the future of Black History Month is very much in its Pan-African, very much emerging out of this sort of Pan-African sort of setting and origins, but also expanding. So even in thinking about how expansive Pan-African identities are, I mean, it's encompassing people of African descent across the world. We're also asking that this idea of Black History Month that served its usefulness or served its purpose, that we need to move forward, and that needs to be now the next step, which is recognizing that this is part of a broader world history, and that this actually concerns everyone, that we're very much interconnected and we can't compartmentalize our histories and our experiences in this way. So we need to move forward, and that needs to be a collective as opposed to just the responsibility of people of African descent. But I think there's a couple of things that Kelly has said that I think just serves as an important reminder to me, but just quite poignant. And that's, again, that institutions were established to be permanent. They weren't established to bring about change. So I think to return to this conversation about, you know, how do we do this? How do we move this forward? How do we repoliticize Black History Month? Well, its origins are in kind of activism, are in sort of pushing back against inequality, and that's the trajectory we've been set on, and that's the trajectory we have to continue. And so whilst we're all gathered here under the umbrella of the Network for Racial Justice at City, which is an important space, we also are having this conversation within an institution. And so it's also important that these conversations aren't held in this space. I mean, at least we're now having this conversation virtually, and so in and of itself that opens things up. And I think part of the conversation spoke to how COVID as a disruptor could also potentially be a force for positive change, and it might open up new ways of engaging. But it's that sort of moment to remember that we're working within the existing frameworks. We're having this conversation about Black History Month. We're feeling that we're being confined or constrained by operating within this month, but we're also perpetuating that by doing that, because we're doing this because the institution expects that, so to speak. So we're kind of in it, and we need to come out of it at the same time. So we need to use this as an opportunity to have this conversation, but make sure that the basis of this conversation doesn't happen in this space. That actually the way to move forward is actually to operate beyond the confines of this space. And so that's kind of what I'm taking away from this. And I think that's the strong internationalist view, the strong Pan-Africanist view. And again, this idea of our collective destinies are very much interlinked, and that's people of African descent, but also us as a humanity, as a people, because again, Black history is world history. So that's kind of what and I feel actually quite energized, in as much as I know that Nathan was concerned that that his views might be quite cynical. I think actually in having this conversation, I feel quite energized and actually having a clearer sense of where we're at and what we need to do collectively moving forward. So again, I want to thank you all, and thank you, Jenny, as well, for being the real kind of driving force behind this. And thank you all for your comments and your contributions.
Thank you, Louisa. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Nathan. Thank you so much to all the participants from NRJ. One day I will tell the story behind this acronym, but not today. So NRJ and the students and all the other people who joined from City and beyond. It was very inspiring and very refreshing to have you all. Thank you so much for your contribution, dear panelists. Do take care. Don't be strangers. We have conversations and things to do outside of October. So let's get ready. Let's mobilize, organize, and strategize. And thank you so much. Keep well, stay good, and until very soon.
Thank you. Be well, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening in too. Thank you very much.